Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Rants and Yarn with Two Best Friends. And again, I'm sorry, Stefanie's unable to make another video. She's been busy. So, I'm here to bring you guys another video this week. And I apologize for not having a video last week, but as all of you know, it was Father's Day. It was Father's Day, and I was at my father-in-law's house celebrating Father's Day. So hopefully a lot of you got to celebrate Father's Day with your dads or kids, and I wish a happy belated Father's Day to all those fathers out there, or fathers-to-be. And my condolences go out to you, to those who no longer have fathers and are unable to celebrate with them, but that you were able to cherish the time you had with your fathers. And I'm glad that the weather's a bit cooler and not as hot as it was in the prior weeks. It was just hard to deal with, but now it's getting cool. It's been not so super hot anymore, so it's been easier to deal with. So, the article I have for you today is, these men are fighting to abolish the death penalty from death row. And, Project Hope to Abolish the Death Penalty is the nation's only anti-death penalty organization run by death row prisoners. And, yeah, it's hard to do anything from prison, but most prisons, they have like libraries and places you can go do reading and research and stuff like that, you know? And in my opinion, you can do anything. You can start a movement in prison. I don't know how successful it is, unless you have people that are willing to listen to you or help you out in the outside world. But people try nonetheless. And here's a picture of all these people who are part of the organization, and it's surprising to me that there's only one white man in the organization among all the blacks in the prison who's part of the organization. Second pebbles. Okay. It was on a September morning in 1993 when police in Morgan County, Alabama, dragged Gary Drinkard through his car window and threw him to the ground. Minutes before, he'd been sitting in his kitchen with his half-sister discussing a newspaper article about the murder of a local junkyard dealer named Dalton Pace. A wire taped between her legs recorded the conversation. Oh, her half-sister was helping in this case. A wire. Feeding it to the officers stationed outside. The police told Drinkard, who had served time for robbery but was working hard to turn his life around, that he was being charged with Pace's murder. 2 weeks earlier, the 62-year-old had been found shot dead with $2,000 missing from his pants pocket. As Drinkard sat in the Morgan County jail, one of his attorneys assured him that there was no evidence tying him to the crime and that he would be out in no time. And I mean, the worst part is not that that he stole the money. It's that he killed the person, you know? And who knows what the motive was, but I mean, if you can't, the hard part is if you can't find a suspect in the crime and you're able to find someone to link it to, that person, innocent or not, gets charged. And it's sad to see that if you don't have anyone to put into jail, the person who was put there falsely gets put into jail, stays in jail falsely, and that's not fair. The system is supposed to work. Like, if evidence shows that it was someone, but then they're no longer, you don't have to keep someone in jail for the crime. They say, well, the person who actually did it died. Okay, you get exonerated. The person who actually did it is dead, so moving on, you know? At least they're not roaming free anymore to do something again, or they're not roaming free because they're paying for their crime. Whether they're dead or not, it shouldn't matter. In my opinion, it counts more that you found the correct person. Whether they died and they can't serve in jail doesn't give you the right to keep someone for the crime that didn't commit it. That's not fair. And that shouldn't be how it works. Oh, well, we don't have someone to put into jail. We already have someone who was, you know. And I'm like, excuse me. Oh, well, I can't acknowledge their confession because they're dead now. That shouldn't even matter. Because that's not fair to the person who didn't commit the crime. Even if you submit them to a polygraph and they pass. That's just sad beyond sadness. Neither of Drunkard's court-appointed attorneys was a criminal lawyer, and neither had tried a capital murder case. Each received a scant $1,000 from the state to mount Drunkard's defense. Oh, that's sad, because, maybe he couldn't afford a criminal defense lawyer, so a lawyer was appointed for him, but that's sad because the court couldn't appoint him someone who had dealt with criminal defense. Drunkard said he'd been at home at the time of the murder, and that a painful back injury would have made committing the crime impossible. His lawyers, however, failed to prepare a key witness and call in a physician to testify about the back injury. When Drunkard's case went to trial, he was sentenced to death. That was in 1995. But that's so sad, because he didn't even do it, and they didn't even, try to corroborate his story that he really did have a back injury. That's not fair. I lose everything, Drunkard, now 63, said 25 years later, still speaking of the verdict in the past tense. I lose the dream home, lose the family. It was a bitch. Drunkard told his wife to find another man. She thought he didn't love her, but that wasn't true. He wanted to find someone to help take care of their 3 children. Well, of course, because for a single mother to have to take care of 3 kids on her own is hard. Of course, he wanted her to, find a new partner. Maybe not necessarily a new love, but a new partner, because he was never getting out, and he wanted his kids to have to have a male figure in their life. That's understandable. A couple of months after he arrived on death row at the William C. Home Correctional Facility, Drunkard met Daryl Grayson, who offered him coffee, cigarettes, and an invitation. Each Wednesday, Grayson and a group of the other death row inmates would meet in the prison's law library and work on a plan to raise awareness about inequity in the criminal justice system. Dubbed Project Hope, to abolish the death penalty. It was and remains the nation's only anti-death penalty organization run by death row inmates. Of course, not a lot of death row inmates go to that length to do anything. Of course, if the members die or their time comes to die, they probably have to find other people to join. And there's a lot of, I told you that most jails that are big enough, they have library there, law books and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not sure if it's going to help people get their case appealed if they learn more about the situation, but it's unfair because some people, they don't get a fair trial and they don't get all the fair things, and you end up with people who die who don't deserve it. And it's hard. There's a lot of people who get exonerated, but there's a lot of other people who just end up where they end up. But it's, in my opinion, the good Lord will take care of it after and say, well, we'll exonerate the person after if it's duly deserved. A couple of months after he arrived on when Drunkard arrived at Holmes, the organization was just 6 years old. It had been formed in 1989 after Cornelius Singleton, an intellectually disabled man who had been convicted of killing a nun, but who many believe was innocent, begged 2 death row inmates for help. Over the next few months, they put together a 5-man committee that outlined the group's purpose. They would educate the public, the people responsible for deciding their fates, on the realities of the death penalty in Alabama, in a crucial mission. Again, innocent man who killed someone. I mean, it's easy to just say, well, I have to pin someone for the murder, and this person looks good for it. But does evidence point that way? But even when you watch some crime scene TV shows like I do, they can still always get it wrong and get the wrong guy. So it's terrible. But here in real life, it's like a lot of people get pinned for something they didn't do, and it's hard to appeal your case. It is. In the 30 years since Project Hope's members have come and gone, Singleton was executed in 1992, Grayson in 2007, and Drinkard won his freedom in 2001. But Project Hope continues. Its mission now expanded to include providing legal guidance and emotional support as well as advocacy. The non-profit is currently composed of 15 men as well as an advisory board of outside supporters. Its mighty executive director, Esther Brown, now 85, is a former psychiatric social worker whom one member referred to as the most loyal person I've ever known. I'm so happy that Drunkard, he got his freedom in 2001. I am glad. I mean, some people are going to be mad because they say, well, someone has to pay for that. I mean, yeah, but not the wrong person. So if he's innocent, he's innocent. Even if they don't catch the actual person that killed the man, I mean, then so be it. But it's not this guy. You can't just keep this guy in jail so someone pays for the crime just for the sake of it, you know? And I'm glad that this organization has outside support now, and people are really working to overturn are looking at cases case by case, because it's you need this kind of help, because not everyone can afford or has family who can afford an actual legit lawyer for them who can go back and analyze the case to the depths that it needs to be done. and you get the 50-50 chance of being exonerated or dying. You know, it's hard. But of course, the people who truly didn't commit their crimes are the ones who are supposed to be part of this committee. So if you truly did commit your crime, you want to better yourself and help other people, fine. But if you did commit a crime, you need to pay the price for it. Project Hope meets at Holman, but says that it represents all 176 people on Alabama's 3 death rows, sending its newsletter to the men and a handful of women held at the 2 other prisons that house people awaiting execution. Hidden from the rest of the world, these men and women have reached the end point of a system that seems to have been designed to snare people who are poor, of color, or intellectually disabled. Adequate legal representation is rare. Prosecutorial misconduct is rampant. In 2016, Alabama had the highest number of death row inmates per capita in the United States. Today, half of those men are black, despite making up just a quarter of Alabama's population. In the 6th poorest state in the country, of all of Project Hope's members are impoverished. This fundamental inequity of the axis around which so much of the group's work spins. See, it's all biased because you get black, impoverished, and people with like illness of sorts, you know? They're the people who get targeted. Oh, well, because of your situation. Oh, well, because of your situation, you're the one that gets, you know, indicted for causing this and such murder or such and such thing that puts you into jail because of your situation. I'm like, really? Screw the situation. Look at the actual crime and figure out who actually did it. Now that you got DNA at your disposal and more science to back it up, you know? Don't just target people because of their background for whatever crime they committed. That's not right. There are no rich people on death row, wrote Anthony Tyson, the organization's chairman, in a letter. The Alabama Department of Corrections refused to allow in-person interviews with Project Hope's members, citing a state law prohibiting the press from meeting face-to-face with death row prisoners. If you fit the bill they're looking for and you are broke, then you receive the death penalty. And that's sad, because when you're rich, of course you can afford the best lawyer there is out there, and you can afford proper defense for yourself, and you can always have money to bail yourself out and all that stuff. And even if you get jailed, you're able to like barter for a life sentence instead of the death penalty, which is sad, because when you don't have the money to do any of that stuff, you automatically just get sentenced to what you get sentenced. That's not fair, because there should be like rich people on death row too, if they duly deserve it. Since the organization's inception, Holmes's wardens have allowed Project Hope to exist, so long as its members abide by one clear rule: they may not discuss prison conditions. Instead, during the weekly Wednesday meetings, members talk about current death penalty news, which they learn from articles sent in by one of the advisory board members. Lately, that news has been focused on legislative efforts to abolish the death penalty in states like New Hampshire, Nevada, and Colorado. The men are hopeful that with each new state that abandons the practice, the moral tide will shift, drawing the states that still have capital punishments. Some 30 in all, though 4 have recently instituted moratoriums into the anti-death penalty column. They've also been working on a long-term project that aims to show the radical disparities of the death penalty in states across the country. I mean, I don't know if Texas will ever abolish the death penalty, because I know in Huntsville, Texas, that's where it happens. Texas is really set in their ways, and it's hard to like really change things in Texas. So if Texas is able to like change their laws, then we will really see progress and change. Because number one, I'm telling you for sure, is Texas. Because putting everything else aside, Texas is one of the biggest pro-death penalty. So if you see them turn around and become anti-death penalty, then you had a big break in the U.S., in my opinion. At 10 a.m. on these Wednesdays, the group's 6 board members phoned Brown, who has been the face of Project Hope for the past 19 years, with duties that include representing it at speaking events and conferences, writing grant proposals, maintaining the website, and keeping the books. The organization raised roughly $3,000 annually. Brown pays for the weekly meeting calls and the yearly Christmas party out of her pocket. During the calls, the men speak with her on topics that, in addition to the death penalty news, can vary from family and friends to the day's lunch. So, yeah, that's how the meeting goes. You get the outside news and you bring it into the inmates, and then they learn what's going on with cases and particulars about that's related to the organization, which is good. And at least there's someone who foots the bill and funds, and they raise enough money just to support what little their organization is doing, They're trying their best, Sitting in a floral-patterned armchair in her home in southeast Alabama last July, Brown listened as the organization's sergeant-at-arms, Anthony Boyd, or Ant, led a conversation about the way that spending money on education instead of the death penalty could transform a broken system. You pay teachers what they're worth, there will be less crime and more scholars, but they want to spend money taking lives, he said. I mean, I guess that's true. Like, if kids stay in school, they'll be less likely to go out and commit a crime. Or, like, be in gangs and stuff like that. And I agree. I agree with that, but some students, it's just if you pay the teachers enough, then they'd have more incentive to help those underprivileged. They're like, okay, I'm getting paid well. I can spend my extra time, tutoring this kid, helping them, and trying to get them to want it all. Tyson, the group's chairman, knows that states' priorities are elsewhere. There's 2 things never going out of business in Alabama, he said, corrections and funeral homes. Well, that's true. And here we're talking only about Alabama because that's where the inmates live. And they're just trying to project it throughout all of the United States. But yeah, of course, in any state, the only places that are never going to go out of business are corrections and funeral homes. That's a given statement. He's not wrong there. Not just in Alabama, but all over. When Vice Chairman Bart Johnson took the phone, Brown chastised him for calling her ma'am. I'm Esther. I don't want this ma'am thing, she joked. Each 15-minute phone conversation ends with I love you. Oh, so they only get 15 minutes on the telephone each week to get all the information from the outside world. I would have hoped that it could at least be like 30 minutes, but you take what you can get, The rest of the meeting takes place among the men and runs until 1:30 p.m. 10:30 to 1:30 p.m. Wow. Some of them stick around for Tyson's law class or enlightenment group. Oh, so he makes a class out of it and study time out of it, which is good. And it gives them something to do, because there's nothing else you're going to do in your cell besides just sit there reading a book maybe, or watching TV maybe, or sitting with your thoughts, you know. So, better keep yourself busy, you know. Which educates the men on how to navigate the state and federal appellate processes. Oh, yeah, appeal process. Well, if you're able to get an appeal, then you better learn your stuff so you can have a fair shot, you know. Because some people, that's all you got. You got one shot and that's it. For most of them, a key component is learning how to advocate for themselves, including with their attorneys. Our lawyers need us to remind them of things, Tyson said. We are not their top case or their only case, so we have to be our case. Of course. I mean, if you're not the only case out there, I mean, I'm not saying these court-appointed lawyers, they're like saddlebagged with more cases than they can even handle sometimes, and they can't remember everything. If they have to go to handle a case one day, they're going to review it that morning or the night before, whatever, and get up to par, but of course they easily forget something, so you have to learn your own case and jot things down. So when you're talking to your lawyer beforehand, preparing, you can ask those questions and bring things to light for them. That will help your case. You know, because they're not going to remember everything. Or later you can remind them of things while you're at your hearing, you know. You can say, well, you know, and you can bring things up yourselves too. And have your lawyers back you up, you know, because it's hard for them to remember everything, or you have everything under their belt and you just rely on their trust, because you can very well see, oh, well, my lawyer forgot to do this or didn't do that. Well, did you ask him to? Or did he just not want to? See, here's the thing too. It's like, did he do what you asked him to, or did he not? Because it has to be fair if they did what you requested. Because if they didn't, it's not fair as well. Over the past 11 years, 2 of Tyson's students, Montez Bradley and William Ziegler, have been freed, and several have gotten their sentences reduced to life. Tyson doesn't attribute the victories to his class, but instead to the teamwork between his newly legal savvy students and their attorneys. At the end of the year, Tyson administers an exam to his students. Anyone who gets a perfect score can choose any item they want from the commissary. Since taking over the group in 2007, he has paid up twice. And yeah, that's the best prize you can get when you're in prison. So you take what you get. And in my opinion, this helps, because people can, he's not saying that, oh, I did a good job in teaching them, instructing them. They did their part by preparing themselves and paying attention, and see, some people, they get exonerated or their sentence is reduced till, like, they get off the death row and they're just in prison for the rest of their lives, and that's fine too, you know. I mean, you gotta try. But you can't just try on your own without knowledge. Knowledge is power. Because you can help your lawyer. Of course, you should never go to trial or go to an appeal without a lawyer, period. You always need a lawyer. And if you were a lawyer or a law student before you got into trouble, then yeah, maybe you can represent yourself. Maybe you can represent yourself and you'll have an upper hand. But, I mean, those are the only extreme cases I suggest anyone try to represent themselves. Because even court-appointed lawyer is better than nothing at all, you know. And in the case of Ted Bundy, when he tried to represent himself in the end, that went AWOL. Because he was never gonna get anywhere. He was never gonna get exonerated. And his girlfriend couldn't even keep him straight. And his wife couldn't, and then after that his wife couldn't keep him, didn't have a chance to have time outside of jail with him to see if it would work. So, you know. While anyone on death row can join Project Hope, there are rules. Members must act respectfully, and they are required to contribute to the quarterly newsletter on Wings of Hope, which is written by the men on typewriters at Holman and sent to Brown, who adds her own content and takes it to the printer. The newsletter is distributed to the 1,300 subscribers. Wow! I'm surprised that they have a lot of subscribers for their newsletters. That's a good thing, I guess. I mean, because they're working for the better of the system. Because in my opinion, you have to help yourselves. The system is not always going to be on your side. But you can't just do it with inside the prison. You have to have outside help too. Sorry everybody for my congested nasally nose. I don't know why. Always. Anyway, moving on. In its most recent issue, Brown, who was diagnosed with a brain tumor late last year, announced that she would be stepping down from her duties. "I would like to be remembered as someone who was incredibly fortunate," she wrote in a piece titled "Thank You. I always received what I gave many times over. I was never a victim, but did whatever I did because it expressed me and rewarded me." Aw, so sad. But hopefully there will be someone to take her place, or maybe she can find someone. I hope. When he was asked by Daryl Grayson to join Project Hope, Drinkard, whom had once been a supporter of the death penalty, wasn't sure that the group would achieve much. Still, he decided to join. He devoured the law class and quickly earned a reputation as something of a legal scholar. He penned letters to politicians and local leaders, urging them to support a moratorium on the death penalty in Alabama. And over time, he drew closer to the men in Project Hope. You met people from everywhere, from every different form, and you were all brothers. You were all there for the same reason, to be killed by the state, he said. I mean, of course you're going to be for the death penalty when it's not you innocently there, standing in its midst, of being the one who's going to be part of it. But once you face it and you're like, I'm innocent, but here I am, facing the death penalty, oh my god, I hate it now. You know? Because when you're just from the outside looking in and not understanding it to its full extent, you don't realize what's happening. You don't realize that there are innocent people in there who don't deserve that punishment. Until you become one of them and you're like, oh my gosh. You know? I have to fight my way out. Or at least try. And Drunkard was successful. But there are those unlucky people who aren't. Despite the kinship, Drinkard sometimes thought of suicide. He was overwhelmed by the hopelessness of facing death for a crime he didn't commit. And when it came time for his friends to die, as inevitably happened, the scent of their flesh burning in an electric chair haunted him. After Alabama executed his best friend, Brian Baldwin in 1999, drunkard nearly jumped on a guard he'd heard laughing about packing cotton up Baldwin's rectum, a standard practice in execution back then. Oh, wow. I've never heard of that one. And sorry, people, I didn't warn you guys. This may be like trigger video article about this because the death penalty is such a strong subject. Well, I'm gonna put a disclaimer probably. I'm gonna put a disclaimer for you guys before you start watching the video and warn you all about this. But I want you all to know that this needs to be heard. But wow. Of course drunkard would be mad because it's like his best friend who's the one that died, and for a guard to laugh, laughing at the fact that before someone gets electrocuted in the chair, they get cotton balls stuck up their rectum. I'm like, really? Torture them before they die? I mean, seriously? That's insane. Not that it's unheard of, but when you hear it, it's like, and cotton balls up a rectum is not comfy. It was at times like these that Drunkard would write poems for the Project Hope newsletter, like the one titled Living Tomb, which began, "When, oh when, will our nation see, they are likely to be next sitting beside me." Still, death row was a lot less violent than the rest of the prison, Drunkard said. During the nearly 6 years he was there, he never witnessed a fight. I mean, you don't witness a fight because what fight is there to put? You can get mad when you hear a guard say nasty comments, or nasty things, but other than that, people are just peaceful in there because they know no matter what, they're gonna die anyway, and if they just keep themselves, in line, maybe they'll get exonerated or find their way out. But it's just a 50-50. So, because if you do something bad, it could just I'm not sure if it's going to rush your execution date, but it might. But in the general population, there was a fight or a stabbing once a week. Drunkard attributed this relative calm to Project Hope. Timothy Stidham, a former Holman corrections officer who oversaw death row from 2015 to 2016, agreed. They're a great support group for each other. They do a lot of good things for them, I will say that. Well, because nobody forms any support between all the inmates in general population. I mean, seriously. Maybe there's some that try, but nobody really wants to be in there, and they're mad and they're frustrated and they're going through withdrawals of sorts. It's a lot in general population and in regular prison. But in death row, you've already got all those things out, and it's like, what more do I have to live for? Why will I do all these things? You just live in your cell, you get forgiven you through there, you maybe get a little bit of outside time, and that's about it, and you form like a group of people that you can talk to during your outside time or during your library time, and that's about it, For Tyson, who has spent 20 of his 46 years at Holman, the group's legacy runs deeper still. I really feel that this was one of the greatest things that could have been offered for a person in this situation, he wrote. A lot of us really didn't start living until we got here. So we don't call it death row, we call it life row. Well, of course, because you get an awakening when you get there versus general population. Because when you're general population, you still have a chance. One of the ways that Project Hope has managed this shift is by helping keep people alive, quite literally. It's a feat that the group accomplishes not only by providing emotional support for its members, but also by offering legal resources and guidance. Of course, you try to keep people from committing suicide, you try to help people get an appeal and try again. And you succeed in some and you don't succeed in others. Shortly after they arrive at Holman, Project Hope's members advise new prisoners to contact the Equal Justice Initiative, the non-profit legal organization run by Brian Stevenson, to ask for help obtaining an appellate attorney. It's a critical task, as Alabama was the only state in the country that didn't provide counsel for post-conviction proceedings until 2017, and even now, the quality of their representation remains uncertain. The group also serves as a broader advocacy role. When in June 2018, the state announced that prisoners had 3 days to decide whether they'd like to die by lethal injection or nitrogen gas, an experimental method that kills through asphyxiation and was cooked up by the state as an alternative to lethal injection. Project Hope spread the word for everyone to contact their attorneys. Of course, that's not enough time. 3 days is not enough time to decide what you want for yourself in this dire situation, you know? If it's like, okay, you got 3 days to decide where you want to go on vacation. Okay, that's easy. Just look at my bucket list and, see how many days I have and this is what I'm going to do, But it's not that simple. It's like how you're going to die and, some people are just overwhelmed when they get in there, that they don't think, oh, I'm going to die right away. I get time. So I'm going to be in there for some sort of time frame. I can still appeal this, and I got time to just put everything into focus and then get started. But at some point, you don't have enough time. Like, now you're given 3 days to decide how you want to die. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, I need to call my lawyer. Hey, stat. These are vital interventions into a system designed to hasten people toward their deaths. In Alabama, the list of circumstances that qualify someone for the death penalty is long. There is no statewide public defender's office outfitted with the necessary resources to successfully try a capital murder case. Instead, individual attorneys must rely on elected judges to approve funds for experts and investigators. And in 2017, the state made it even more difficult for death row inmates to fight their convictions by passing the so-called Fair Justice Act, which requires death row prisoners to file post-conviction claims on issues like ineffective assistance of counsel or new evidence within a year of their direct appeal. While its supporters champion the legislation as a way to speed up frivolous appeals, critics say that the likelihood of wrongful execution will increase without the opportunity for attorneys to take their time reviewing their clients' cases. See? That's the problem! You don't get time! Time to do these things! And you're being rushed to, get to the end result that it gets screwed out of the way. So it's like, if you don't get help from the outside world for yourself, you're screwed. But perhaps the most egregious feature of Alabama's death penalty regimen is the anemic trial representation it provides for poor defendants. These remain as appealing as it was throughout much of the South back in the 1970s and 80s, says Robert Dunham, Executive Director of the Death Penalty Information Center. I think Alabama represents much of what is wrong with the death penalty throughout the United States. Dunham adds, there are few standards in place to assure the quality of the attorneys assigned to the cases, and the pay is paltry. Until 1999, attorneys received $1,000 to build their case, $20 an hour for out-of-court work, and $40 for in-court work. Today they are paid $70 an hour for out-of-court work. While there is no longer a cap for the trial, direct appeals are now capped at $2,500. Which is good, because the lawyers need to be paid fairly so they can do their job well. If they're paid underpaid, they're like, well, you know, I'm working so hard my ass here that trying to help this poor man and I'm not getting paid well enough. It's hard on me too. I should be doing it pro bono, but you know. Data shows that hiring an attorney as opposed to going with the state's court-appointed representative is the difference between those who receive the death penalty and those who don't. Like I said before. Yet paying for an experienced lawyer is not an option in most cases. In 2009 study by criminologist Scott Phillips assessed that the outcomes of trials in which defendants were charged with capital murder in Harris County, Texas between 1992 and 1999. Harris County is known as the capital of capital punishment. Yet the standards for appointment to represent capital cases far exceed those in Alabama. Attorneys must be approved by their peers and pass capital certification exam, and the lead counsel must have tried at least 2 capital cases before being assigned. Phillips found that people who hired attorneys were never sentenced to death, despite being charged with crimes just as heinous as the indignant defendants. Well, of course, because they're really good lawyers and they know how to do their job properly, and all the evidence, they know to gather all the evidence against that person. But those who can't afford that, it's hard. I truly understand. I sympathize for those people. Since 1973, 165 people, or 1 out of every 10 people executed, have been exonerated. Woohoo! Woohoo! These exonerations, coupled with the growing concerns around lethal injection, have helped shift support away from the death penalty, with an increasing number of states opting to put executions on hold. But despite this evolving consensus, for most men in Project Hope, the story still ends in a sterile room, lashed onto a gurney, awaiting an injection. Well, not everybody's lucky. The state has used lethal injection as the primary method of execution since 2002, prior to which it used an electric chair, ghoulishly known as Yellow Mama. Of course, they have to name their electric chair, but it's ghouly. You can just sit there and stare at it, and it gives you an eerie feeling. The lethal injection, just sitting on that gurney, it's not really as much of an eerie feeling. So you can stare at it, and it's like, but you can stare at an electric chair and just like, get scared out of your wits. In the week leading up to an execution, Project Hope members say they make themselves available to listen to the condemned. They promise the man they will make calls to friends, family, or an attorney if anything goes wrong. And as they all know, much can go wrong. Just last year, Doyle Lee Ham was suffering from advanced lymphatic cancer, bled profusely as executioners spent 2.5 hours trying unsuccessfully to find a vein. If you already have advanced lymphatic cancer, then just sit with it. You're going to die anyway. Then just let them die by the natural cause of cancer. Trying to find a vein of someone with lymphatic cancer is beyond hard. It's beyond hard. Of course they're going to just bleed to death anyway. They're just going to be a cause of death. Bleeding. by bleeding out. You can just let that be and forget about the lethal injection, you know? I'm like, serious, think about it. Think about it. You didn't need to go to that length. They were going to die anyway. Because you know what's going to happen. A doctor can tell you. Because it took them 2.5 hours to find a vein, which they were not even successful in doing. Man. On the day before and day of the execution, the group's members protest in the yard, asking all inmates to wear their visiting whites and abstain from sports. A vigil is held, during which the men share memories of the man scheduled to be executed. When a board member is executed, the group holds an election. The higher someone advances in the organization, the closer they are to death. Oh, man. I don't like that truth, but okay. Executions are never easy, wrote Anthony Boyd, Project Hope Sergeant at Arms, in a letter after the execution of Dominic Ray this past February. Ray was left to die alone after the Supreme Court determined that he was constitutional for Alabama to ban his imam from the death chamber. You worry for the person going through it all. Boyd continues, you worry about losing one of your own, and it makes you think about how it could be for you personally. Something doesn't get done on your behalf. Yeah, sad. For Drunkard, it was luck and persistence that ultimately led to his exoneration. While in prison, he wrote to attorneys asking them to represent him on his appeals. His letters caught the eye of the well-known Alabama death penalty attorney Richard Jaffe, who told him it would cost $250,000 to represent him, money that Drunkard did not have. In a stroke of luck, Jaffe convinced the local judge to appoint him to the case. Drunkard says his work with Project Hope prepared him to advocate for himself and work more closely with his new lawyers. I knew what the lawyers should do the second time, where I actually didn't know the first time. Of course, when you don't know the first time around, you're just sitting there at the mercy of your lawyer. But the second time around, if you prepared yourself, you know what the lawyer's supposed to do, and you know what you're supposed to do, and you know how it's supposed to work, and you can help yourself and help the lawyer too. But at least he got appointed that judge, and instead of him just picking him because he wouldn't be able to afford it. Unless they could make up a pact and say, well, I'll start paying you until I paid you off once I get out of here and I can get secured a job, you know. But here's the next thing, getting secured a job. But then the lawyer should be able to help you with that so he can get his payments, you know. The Alabama Supreme Court ordered a new trial on the basis that his first trial had been tainted by prosecutorial misconduct. Drunkard was exonerated in 2001 after his defense team presented evidence proving that he had never confessed to the murder on the static-ridden tape recorded in 1993 and called witnesses to prove he was indeed at home. For nearly 6 years on death row, Drunkard was freed. I mean, he didn't even confess to it. His half-sister was wearing it, and there was nowhere, they didn't even say, oh, he confessed. They were just talking about the case, and because it was on the paper, you know, it was just casual conversation. Still, almost 18 years later, he remembers death row vividly. The hot air suffocating his cell, the sounds of his friends beating against the bars during executions, and the times he felt overpowered by hate. I hated the system because they lied, and there was nobody out there willing to prove the lies. Nobody would listen, and that's the worst feeling you can have, when nobody will listen. That's true, when nobody will listen to you, that you're innocent, and it's like, you're sitting there waiting for your day. Like, oh my gosh, you know? That's the hardest. Like those who are exonerated before him, Drunkard never received compensation from Alabama for his time on death row. Survives on Social Security disability insurance, having been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. He studied respiratory therapy after getting out of prison, but no one would hire him because of his murder conviction, which he could not get expunged. Aw, that's hard. That's so hard. I mean, you know, come on. There's got to be people who will hire you to do based on all that. It's really hard. It's really hard, especially if you don't get an expungement. Getting a job is near. I mean, there should be someone there to help you get a job, you know. And so free. Drinker says that his living room in the North Alabama backcountry, furnished with a pair of brown recliners, a leather couch, and a flat-screen television, is his new version of death row. In this version, it's easier to get people to listen. Travels the world trying to change minds about the death penalty. In October, he went to Paris to talk to high school students. Oh, Paris, Alabama. In February, he traveled to Wyoming to speak in support of a bill to repeal the death penalty. As always, he mentioned Project Hope. It was only natural. They were family, he said. Most of them admitted what they did wrong, but there were a couple of innocents that actually died, he continued. But the public didn't care. Public's mentality in the South is kill them all and God will sort them out. Really? God's supposed to sort them out, not have us kill them. That's the wrong way of thinking. That's the wrong way of thinking. I mean, if they're innocent, they're innocent. And if otherwise proven so, then God will take care of them then, you know? It's not for us to say, you know? If they're proven guilty, fine. But if there's no evidence, let it be. The right person will get convicted by God, you know? It's just hard. Because the South is known for that since forever. And it's hard to change. But hopefully things will change some point in the next, I don't know how many years. Anyway, everyone, thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me on this video, and I hope you guys have a good week ahead of you. And I'm out.